Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Welcome to you all here and to all those streaming live with us this evening to Pioneer Catholic's first Introduction to Catholic Thought event of the semester, a talk given by Stephen Ray entitled Swimming Upstream, Living a Catholic Life in a Pagan World. Convert, pilgrimage leader, and Catholic apologist, Steve Ray has written works which include Crossing the Tiber and Upon This Rock, and also produced the series The Footprints of God, the story of salvation from Abraham to Augustine. It is a great gift to us all to have him speaking here tonight. And so without further ado, please help me welcome Steve Ray.
Thank you. I assume that I'm on. Is that correct? I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. I have done all those things, made movies and written books, but the thing I'm proudest of is that I've been married to the same woman for 45 years, and I love her more now than when I married her. And we have 4 kids and 19 grandchildren. That's the thing I'm proudest of. This talk is about swimming upstream, and you'll see why as we get into it. And it's about how to live in our world today. And it started when I had a conversation with my mom and dad. And my dad died 8 years ago at 94 years old. I went to visit my mother today. She will be, in 40 days, she'll be 100 years old. And she's still alert and can talk and discuss with us. And I remember back a while ago before my dad died. Oh, and by the way, they were married 73 years. They gave me a great example of what it was like, what a real Christian family was. But before they died, when we were in a conversation with them once, I remember my parents saying, "We don't recognize our country anymore." And I thought that was interesting. And I said, "Well, Mom and Dad, why don't you tell me what you mean by that you don't recognize your country anymore?" They were raised during the Depression era. My dad was born in 1919, my mom in 1921. And they had a family and they raised us all through those years, but a lot of things changed. And they said, "Well, Steve, what we mean by that is that we don't recognize the country because it's changed so much, not just because there's television now and iPhones and things like that. That's not our issue. Our issue is the moral leanings, the general attitude and the philosophy of the country and the morals or lack of morals from what we were raised with and what we knew and our generation knew." So I asked them to be more specific. And she said, "Well, Steve, if you would have asked me when I was a young mother, just married and ready to have kids, if I would ever consider getting an abortion," she said, my question would have been, "What's an abortion?" She said, "We didn't even know what that meant." And when it became legalized with the Roe versus Wade in the 70s, she said, we were just dumbfounded by it. It was the first time we were ever introduced to this thing called abortion. She said, and now it's not only has it become legal to kill the baby within a mother's womb, but she said, now I'm expected to pay for it. And not only am I expected to pay for it and accept it, but I'm supposed to applaud it and celebrate it as a victory for women and liberation and so on, even though we view it as an atrocious thing that nobody of our grandparents or great-grandparents or any generation before would have ever it would have been an unthinkable thing to take a baby and rip it out of its mother's womb and say that that was a right and that we should be allowed to do that and that I even have to pay for it. She said, that's what I mean. Also, the whole homosexual revolution that took place. I mean, even when I was a kid growing up, that was totally unthinkable. Of course, people did get abortions in places at times, and people were homosexuals, but it wasn't something my mom said that we ever talked about in polite public. And the whole thing now is that in June is rainbow flags everywhere, and we're supposed to celebrate it. And don't you ever dare say that you see anything wrong with it, or that there's a moral issue involved, or that people from all generations, all the way back to the beginning of humankind, have viewed it as an aberration to the way that we were made to be. And my parents went on and on with these different, I'm just going to bring up those two issues, but there are many other issues as well. And they brought those up and they said, it has changed so much in our lifetime that we're not happy about it. And we're not at all pleased with the changes that have taken place. So that was what got this started, because I thought, well, wait a minute. What's happening in our Western world today, where they have actually gotten God out of the schools, they've gotten God out of public life. This was something else that she talked about, that when they were growing up, pretty much everybody was a Christian. And she didn't mean by that everybody carried a Bible around and quoted John 3:16. That's not what she meant. She meant that we all had a common understanding that there was a God. He was a personal, infinite God, and that we were subject to his rules. And he made us in a certain way and expected us to live in a certain way in the world that he had created. Kind of like the owner's manual for a car. If somebody makes a car, Ford Motor Company, they give you an owner manual. You expect the car to work in a certain way and to function a certain way. And here's the directions. And the Bible were the directions. And for Catholics, of course, it was in the Catholic Church that where we see those rules and things made. And so they said today, and I just have a list here. Today, Christian business people are being sued and persecuted in many cases for living their faith out. From somebody that says, I'm not going to make a cake for a gay wedding, and they get all of a sudden they're persecuted and there's all kinds of trouble. Even if a Catholic feels unsure and unfree to go into the workplace and to say that I think abortion is wrong. Well, in people today, in a work environment, you don't talk about those things because they are, especially if you're talking about it from a Christian perspective, Christians are basically told to shut up. You can keep your Christian ideas and your God and your Jesus and your morality. You can keep it in your head. You can keep it in your house and you can keep it in your church, but don't you dare bring it out into the public square. Don't you dare bring your Christianity into politics. Don't you dare bring it into the marketplace. You Catholics just shut up. And if you don't feel or sense that in the world today, you will, because the more and more this is what's happening in our culture. The forces of anti-Christian forces are very strong. And I'm telling you, as an old guy, I'm 65 years old, that it was not like this before you were born. I have kids your age. And even older. And when I was a young man and I was growing up and I was starting my business, it was not like this at all. And it's changed a lot. And what my thinking was when my mom and dad and I were talking is we're actually going back to the paganism of the Greco-Roman times. We're living in a culture and in a society very similar, becoming very similar to what the Greeks and the Romans lived in 2,000 years ago. And in that culture and in that society, that's where Christianity was born. The very first Christians lived in a pagan world. They were despised. They were a despised subculture. They were persecuted. They were hunted down. They had their property taken from them. They had their lives taken from them. And that's what we're going to discuss a little bit here today. And I started to think to myself, well, they turned that pagan world upside down for Jesus Christ in 300 years. When you study history, you'll see that by 313, Christianity was legalized in the Christian empire. It went from just decades ago being persecuted, and we'll talk about that, to now it's an acceptable philosophy, so to speak. And not only is it acceptable, but shortly after that, it became the religion of the empire. So the question I asked myself was, how in the world did these oftentimes uneducated Christians, simple people, they weren't the rulers, they weren't the rich, they weren't the kings, how did they turn the world upside down for Jesus Christ and change the whole moral structure of the whole Roman Empire to being and thinking as Christian? Now, again, not everyone was Christian. Not everyone was an intentional disciple of Jesus Christ, like we all should be. But everybody had the same basic worldview, and slowly, the whole culture took that on. Now, one of the things that I realized was that the early Christians and the societies were very similar. For example, they had polytheism. That means poly means many, theo means God. They had many gods. And when I take my groups now to Rome, and I can't wait to get back there again after all of this COVID stuff, when you go into the Pantheon, which is one of the most fantastic ancient architecture buildings that are still standing today It was a place where all of the gods were worshiped. They had niches around the ceiling, and they'd have Apollo and Zeus and Aphrodite and Artemis, all of them around. And you'd come in there to the pantheon and worship all the gods. And the more gods you had, the better, because then every situation in life was covered by one of the gods. And if you can get all the gods working for you and answering your prayers, what a wonderful thing. And when the Christians came along, they didn't say to the Christians that you can't have Jesus. They just said, well, you can't deny all these other, oh, look, right there's an empty niche. We can put Jesus right up there with all the other gods, and then you can fit in with everybody else, and you'll have your God there, and we all have our gods, and so on, and he's one of many. And the Christians said, no, we can't do that, because our creed says there is one God, and there is only one Lord Jesus Christ, not many. So they had polytheism. But in many ways today, we have the same thing. We have what's called pluralism. Now, I'm not saying that we should say that one culture or way of life or the language or something is better than another. But when you have multiculturalism, many times what that means is that no matter what your morality is, no matter what your background or culture is, it's all equal now. So whatever, when we were growing up, it was, I'm okay, you're okay. Whatever's right for you is good for you. And I have my own truth and you have your own truth, and we're all happy. But everybody balanced their checkbook the same way. 2 + 2 was 4. And so when they came to, if I borrowed $10 from somebody and I paid them back 5, they're going to object and say, wait a minute, you borrowed 10. And I'll say, no, that's my truth. For me now, I say I only owe you 5. It's my truth, my world. What ends up happening in multiculturalism, or that whole idea, is not that any one skin color is better than another or anything like that. But what the idea that is the problem, that is going back to that paganism, is that every God is equal. Every philosophy is equal. There's no difference between them. You can believe whatever you want and you're going to be just fine. So we have that. And in what Pope Benedict XVI, I remember when he talked about the tyranny of relativism, that when you become relative, it becomes a tyranny, and everything is accepted and nothing is accepted, so to speak. And in the world today, just about anything is accepted. Everything is allowed to be believed and talked about, except if you're a Christian. If you're a Catholic, we are one of the last groups of people that can be criticized. We can be slammed. We can be lied about. We can be ostracized in the press and in the government and every other way. You don't dare do that with different races of people. You don't dare do that with, say, for example, the Jews. Jews are ready and quick to defend themselves, but we Christians are kind of the last group of people that are open to be criticized. And so in a relativistic world, everything seems to be okay, except being a Christian, which is kind of where we're headed now in these days. So in my thinking, I came to this idea that there's a timeline, and it's a very simple timeline. There's 300 years of the first Christians as a despised subculture where their religion was illegal. They were considered non-gratis, non-acceptable Roman citizens because they would not accept the Roman gods and the Roman lack of morality, or what they had as a morality. And then that section of time, then the next piece of the timeline is 1700 years after Christianity became legalized and became the religion of the Roman Empire. Then it started to spread and it moved across the world with evangelism and everything. And Christianity brought about all the great things that our Western world is known for, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the third part of the timeline is in modern times, when all of a sudden, for some reason and no good reason, the Western world decided to go back to paganism. They decided to jettison Christianity, to get rid of Christianity and all of those outdated, archaic, bigoted kind of thoughts that try to control people with this God in heaven who has 10 commandments and he has all these strict rules that you have to follow. So you have first the 300 years of Christians being despised. Then you have them converting the world to Christianity, and you have 1700 years of the blessings of Christianity. And then you have now the last 100 years or so where we're slipping in the West back to the paganism that's very similar in many ways to the early Christians' experience. Now, I said that Christianity brought great blessings. Well, we always hear that Christianity is against women. It's against science. It's against art. It's against all of these things. Christianity is the great suppressor of beauty and art and music and liberty and so on, which is really not true at all. Christianity brought about all of the great things that we have. It was not Muslim culture or our pagan culture that brought about many of the great things in the Western world today. The universities came about mainly because Christians started to say, wait, we can think God created things. That science began this way. Actually, he made things. He made us in his image with rationality so that we are now able to think God's thoughts after him. And science, modern science that we have today, developed out of that because we can now look at nature and figure out how God did it because he's reasonable and rational. He made us in his image, the same thing. Even Christianity brought about equality for women. And people say, well, that's ridiculous. How can that be? Well, I would say this: in the Roman Empire and during the Greeks and the Romans, women did not have equality. They were basically owned by their husband or their fathers. They had arranged marriages. Everything was under control. Women were not free to do what they wanted to. They were under the control, even the ownership of a husband or a father. And then Paul the apostle in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 dropped an atomic bomb on the Roman Empire. He wrote in 1 Corinthians 7 that between a relationship between a man and a wife, a man and his wife and her husband, it says that women, you are not to withhold yourself from the marital rights of your husband because he owns your body. So you don't have the right to withhold yourself from him. Well, that sounds very much like what was happening in Rome. Nobody would argue with him about that. But then Paul turns the table and drops the atomic bomb. And he says, and you husbands, do not deprive or withhold yourself from your wives because she owns your body. That set the whole stage for the equality. Paul couldn't go out into the Roman Empire and start saying women are equal and you have to change, but he dropped the bomb, which eventually, as Christianity flourished and grew, brought that whole idea of women, and not perfectly, of course, in many societies, but that's where the whole idea of the equality of women became. Paul said there is neither male nor female in God's eyes in his economy. There's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile. They're all equal. Men and women are equal. This was an atomic bomb that dropped in the Roman pagan empire that they couldn't understand, but Christians, as they developed and began, that was the way they lived their life. That's why eventually slavery was disallowed too. And it was mainly the Protestants in the United States, unfortunately, and in England, that many of them had the slaves, but the Catholic Church opposed slavery from the very beginning. I've done some research on it. It's very interesting. So it was the Catholic Church, which was the church for the first 1,000 or even 1,500 years before the Protestant revolt took place. And so Christianity brought this great beauty. So you have the first 300 years, Christians are persecuted and killed. Then you have because they won't accept the Roman way of life. Then you have 1,700 years where Christianity flourishes and brings all the beauty, the things that Christianity brings about. You know, the great music that you listen to, Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, all of these came out of a Christian culture. The great art that people still go to museums to see, that came out of a Christian culture. So anyway, that's the timeline that I came up with. So who were these early Christians? These ones that could make this kind of change. They weren't the wealthy people. They weren't the rich people, the politicians. In fact, Paul tells us who they were. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, "Consider your call, brethren. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. And he chose what was weak in the world to shame the strong. He chose simple people like us." I don't know if any of you are millionaires or politicians who run things. I don't know that. But my guess is that most of us are simple people. And God chose simple people through the preaching of the gospel in the Roman Empire, and those simple people, by living it out and practicing it, were able to turn the world upside down for Jesus Christ and change the whole culture. They couldn't have churches, these first Christians. They couldn't have churches. It was an illegal religion. If you built a church, the Roman government would say, thank you very much. We're going to turn it now into a stable for our horses. Or they would take it and confiscate it for something else. You couldn't have mass in these buildings like we do today. What you would do is you would go, somebody among you would have a nicer house, maybe a villa in the country, Roman countryside. And they would say, now, all of you can come on Sunday morning, but don't all come at the same time and raise eyebrows. I want you to come to our villa. We're taking a great risk here by using our villa for the Sunday morning liturgy. Some of you come 10 from this direction, and 10 minutes later, if you wander by for this direction, because if we're known and seen, we can be in big trouble. And so they would have the secret masses where they would worship and celebrate God, but they couldn't always do it openly. There were no churches built. The very first churches were built were after 313. Even in Israel, the very first churches built, the Church of Nativity and the Church of Holy Sepulchre. These were all built in the 320s because you couldn't have churches. These people couldn't do World Youth Day. They couldn't have these great assemblies of people that gather together. Even you would be hesitant to do what you're doing now if anybody knew that you were doing it. You couldn't go door to door evangelizing people, and you couldn't go to the emperor's palace and protest his policies if you didn't like what the emperor was doing. You just didn't do that. Christians had to be quiet. They had to be private. They had to be secret. But they did have a way of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and a whole different philosophy of life. And it caused them to be persecuted. Many of them lost their lives. We've seen pictures of the Colosseum and other places where the Christians were slaughtered. I've been to many of them. I did a movie called Apostolic Fathers, where in 1950s, they discovered a theater in Lyon, France, which in 177, all the Christians in Lyon were killed. They took it into the Colosseum, or the theater there, and they were all martyred for Jesus Christ. And there's a story of them that still exists today. And it's unbelievably nauseating and graphic about what the Romans did to these poor Christians. One was named Blandina, and they tortured her for days. They stripped her totally naked. They tied her to a pole, and the soldiers maimed her and abused her in every way, and said until the end of the day, they were all exhausted. And they said, are you going to recant now and turn away from this Jesus you serve? And she says, no, I am a Christian. And this went on for several days. And finally, they put her in a bag, and they let bulls go around pushing her with their horns until she was dead. They had chairs, iron chairs, that they would build a fire under the iron chairs. And then they would strip these Christians naked. And once the chair was red hot with the fire, they'd put them in the chair until they roasted to death. This is the kind of thing that the Christians suffered in the first 300 years of this era. And they almost to a man, very few ever turned back. All of them said, I am a Christian and I will not walk away. And we may not realize that today, but these courageous Christians, they paved the way for us. If it weren't for them, you wouldn't be sitting there today, and I wouldn't be standing here today, because they were the hinge figures. If they had collapsed and they had caved in, Christianity may have never gotten off the ground. But because they were willing to pay this kind of a price, Christianity grew. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But these Christians did, even with that threat of persecution, they were still willing to go out, and they were still willing to live the Catholic Christian life, and they were willing to live it present in the world, and they lived differently. Here's a couple of things. They lived a very self-controlled lives. They weren't profligate like many of the Romans were. And they lived self-disciplined, and they cared for the poor and the advantaged. And they also did talk to people about Jesus, but they had to do it in a careful way. Let me give you an example. Imagine that I go up to a man at a bus stop, and there's a crowd of people, and I've never met this man before. And I just go up to him and I said, hello, sir, how are your kidneys today? What's he going to say to me? My kidneys are none of your business. You're a pervert. Get away from me. What do you want to ask me about my kidneys? You don't even know me. But now, a year later, I have spent that year helping this man. I get to be his friend. We take gifts over to his kids on Christmas. We find out he does have problems, and we go to the hospital to visit him and bring meals to his family and so on for a year. And a year later, I'm at the very same bus stop with the very same man. And I walk up and say, "Good morning. How are your kidneys today?" And how is his response going to be different? He's going to say, "Well, thank you so much for asking. I've been tested and I'm doing better." And all of a sudden, there's a totally different response. What caused the response? It's the same bus stop, the same two guys, and the same question. The difference is they built a relationship. That man earned the right to talk to the kidney guy about his kidneys by becoming his friend and earning the right. And then when I was an evangelical Protestant for the first 39 years of my life, we called it relational evangelism. You build a relationship in order to then earn the right to talk to people about what's important to you. If I want to talk to that person about Jesus Christ, I can't just go up and say, "You're going to hell. You better believe in Jesus." I better first build a relationship and a matter of trust. And then I can begin to pour my heart out and explain to this person. This is what the early Christians did. This is how they began to propagate and tell the gospel. But there was another thing that was huge. And this one was they had a different view of the human person. In Rome, a person was viewed utilitarianism. He was viewed as what value he was to the Roman Empire itself. What good were you for the Roman Caesar? You were utilitarian. You were there for the better of the society. In many ways, in China, that's where they've made a big crackdown in China right now. And they said you cannot be individuals. Your in value and important is to make China great. This is all, I mean, it's very similar, but in the Roman Empire, they were all viewed as being how they could be used. What were their value in that type of way? But the Christians viewed people differently because they said, we're made in the image of God. We're not just creatures. We have infinite value. God made us in his image. He made us eternal creatures, not just our souls, but our bodies. Nobody had an idea of the body being raised from the dead. In the Roman cultures and many of the Greek philosophies, the body was a prison. Death would liberate you from your body. Now you were free out of the prison. But Christianity says, no, God loves us. He made us in his image, body and soul. And at the end of time, we're going to spend eternity in our bodies together. Even Jesus has his body today in heaven still. And so they had this idea that people weren't just to be used. They had infinite value. And that also meant the unborn or the sick and the ill, those who were aged, like my mother today. I told you I visited her today. She's going to be 140 days. And she is incapacitated. She's there, but she's a human being still made in the image of God. And this is what the Christians brought into the Roman society. There's a letter here I just want to read. This is a first century letter, and it's still in existence today. And it was a man, a Roman, who was working in Alexandria, Egypt, and he wrote back home to his wife, I am still in Alexandria. As soon as we receive our wages, I will send them to you. In the meantime, if by good fortune you give birth, if it's a boy, let it live. If it's a girl, expose her. Now, what does he mean by expose her? It's what we would call a euphemism. When you don't really want to say what you're going to do, you come up with another word that sounds not as bad. Expose her. I'll tell you what it means, because here's another quote. When the Romans threw their unwanted newborn babies under the bridges, leaving the infants to be carried away by the wild dogs, the Christians waited in the shadows, took the children home, and raised them as their own. This testimony over a period of time won the hearts of many in Rome. The Christians viewed the babies not as something dispensable. They viewed the baby as something that has infinite, eternal value, made in the image of God. And they didn't have the easy abortion techniques that we have today that can be done behind the walls and nobody even sees what happens. They didn't have that. And then those days, if you didn't want the baby, you would let the baby be born, and then you would discard the baby and the wild dogs would take them away. But the Christians saw the value of those children, that they were made in the image of God. And the church grew because of that, because many of those children that were saved became part of the family and became Christians as well. So this just gives you an idea that human life has not always been valued. It's Christianity that really brought that value and that beauty of an understanding of the human person, who John Paul II has never anybody explained it better than John Paul II. And I'm happy to say that I got to meet him twice. I've met a saint twice. I got to meet him and he gave me rosaries. I got 2 rosaries from him and it was a wonderful event. But he's the one that has championed the personhood, the meaning of the body and of the person as well. Now, in many times through history, there's been human sacrifice. And even 500 years ago in Mexico, I just took a group of people down there. And according to the Aztec records themselves, they said that when they built their new temple, this is only 500 years ago in our hemisphere, that they slaughtered 8,600 human beings to dedicate the temple to their God. And their God's name, I'm not going to try and say it in the Aztec language, but the name of the God is the lover of hearts and the drinker of blood. And that's what they would do. They would take these human beings and they'd cut them open and rip their hearts out and eat their hearts to the gods, in a sense, being gods for the gods. And there's the estimate that maybe 1 out of 5 babies was used for human sacrifices. But you think that that we aren't pagan. Look, I want to give you an example to show you if there's any that still think that we haven't gone back to paganism in our own country. In the biblical times and in many other times as well, they had gods that required human sacrifices, namely infants, because that was such when you had a baby, that was a wonderful thing because they're going to work in the fields. They're going to bring you a daughter. You can have a big family. So to give an infant was a very costly thing to do. So there's 2 gods that were in biblical times, Chemosh and Moloch, from Ammon and Moab, the other side of the Jordan River. And they built these gods as huge cast iron gods. They were huge and they were made out of iron. And then there's a big belly. There was a big hole where they would start the fire and get the wood and the coals and the fire raging. And then it had a big head with big eyes where the smoke would come billowing out of their eyes. And then they would build the hands like this on Moloch and Chemosh, so that it would be the hands were holding out like this. And they would then the priests and they would get everybody from the province together and say, we are going to have our annual feast. And we are going to celebrate the great magnanimity of our gods, Chemosh and Moloch. And we're going to make the offering that they require. And see, we're going to give them our best so we can require the best from them. Usually these were fertility gods because there were agrarian cultures where you're growing things. You need the rain, you need the moisture and the good soil. So they would say, we're going to give you our best. So they would say, we see that you just had a new baby and you just had a new baby and you just had a new baby. You need to bring them on Saturday when we're going to have the great feast to Moloch and the great sacrifice. And the parents were told that they were going to be heroes of the community because they were the ones that offered their children to Moloch, which would bring a blessing then on everybody. And so on Saturday, they would get together, or whatever day it was. And the high priest would take the babies and he'd pray and he'd say, oh, Moloch, we brought you our best and we're praying that you will give us your best. And they would put the babies on the hands of Moloch like this, red hot already, like hamburger hitting a grill. And then they would give the baby a push and it would roll down the arms into the open belly. And you wouldn't even hear the baby scream and cry because the music and the orgies going on, because it was all sexual related to fertility. And the drum, and the drums are pounding and the flutes are playing and people were dancing. And they would offer these babies to Moloch in the fire. And you say, that's disgusting. We would never do anything like that. And yet I would love to challenge people in our country that we still have the god Moloch and we still worship him in this country, even by law. And we have changed his name to abortion. And people are willing to sacrifice their own children for their own prosperity. Oh, I want to make sure I don't have too much money to spend sending my kids through college. I made a mistake in the back seat of the car 6 weeks ago. I don't want anybody to find out. And Americans enshrined in their laws are willing to sacrifice their own children for their own pleasure and prosperity. And I would posit the idea that we have become just as pagan as any of these other cultures that offered humans as sacrifices. In fact, Archbishop Corleone from San Francisco, just in the last week, likened abortion to the very thing the pagans did in offering their children to the gods. So I would say that we are just as much paganized as many of these other countries. And my idea was, if those Christians could turn the world upside down for Jesus Christ in the midst of all of that, how can we then, in a culture that's turning back to paganism, how can we then turn our Western world upside down again for Jesus? Now, there's a lot of bishops, and I gave this talk actually to in our diocese, and the bishop had just written a document on the new evangelization. And I said, with the bishop present in the room, I said, we really don't need any more documents on the new evangelization. We don't need it because we already know how to do it. And the bishop looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, how many of you have read all the documents that have come out of the synods and the councils and from the Vatican about the new evangelization? And every time I ask an audience, nobody raises their hand. I said, that's what I thought. You haven't read them. All these things are being promulgated, but we haven't even read them. But we already know how to convert a pagan world because the early Christians did it successfully. They left us a blueprint. They left us already an idea of how you can convert a pagan empire for Christianity. They did it in 300 years. How did they do it? Well, they did it because they really believed it. They believed it so much that they also were willing to die for it. They condemned contraception, abortion, divorce and remarriage, homosexuality, their infant baptism, immorality, all of these things. And they were the pariahs of society because they were pointing a finger at a society that was doing all of these things. And the societies never want people to point out that they're doing things that are wrong. Who are you to tell us that's wrong? But the Christians did. And they died as martyrs. Do you know when Jesus rose up into heaven, he said, you will be my witnesses? In the Greek, if you read that in the Greek language, it says you will be martus. What English word do you think we get from martus? Martyr. And the catechism says that some of us will be witnesses with our mouths. And some of us will be witnesses with our blood. And that's what the early Christians were willing to do. Had they not been willing to really believe it, even enough to die for it, they would have never converted the Roman Empire. If we are just lazy in our Christianity and we're going to be quiet about our Christianity and we're going to say, you know what, I'll let other people say it. I'm just going to go about my life and I'll worship Jesus on Sunday, but I'm not going to be a disciple all the way around and I'm not going to make any enemies over it. Then we're not going to have the kind of Christianity that can evangelize the world. When I get the chance to talk to seminarians, and I've spoken to seminarians all over the world, in the Philippines and in India, the huge seminaries, sometimes 250, 350 seminarians at a time that I've spoken to in the Philippines and in India and other places. And I always tell them, you guys better be courageous because it's not going to be easy being a priest in the future. It's not going to be easy walking around with a collar and admitting you're a priest to the world. It's not going to be easy to be a Catholic in the world, anywhere in the world, in the next decade or 2 or 3 decades. And I said, you guys, this is not a career that you're getting into. It's a massive love affair with the bride of Christ. And you are going to meet your bishop and he's going to put oil on your forehead and ordain you a priest. But at the same time, he's going to paint a bullseye on your chest. Are you willing to walk around the rest of your life with a bullseye that said, I'm a Christian, I'm a target? And every single one, I said, if you're a coward, leave now. Every single one of those young men stood up and applauded and says, we're not going anywhere. We believe. It was a great emotional boost for me and all the other people there in the room. But the seminarians know that there might become times where they're all going to become martyrs for the faith. The first 30 popes died as martyrs. When they took the chair of Peter, they knew they were going to die as martyrs because they all did for the first 300 years. Tertullian was an early Christian writer. He wrote in Latin. He's known as one of the first great Latin theologian. And he wrote that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. What did he mean by that? Well, the word arena comes from the Latin word sand. So that they would have the sand. They'd have a big arena and covered with white sand, and they would bring people in, and that was their entertainment, like the gladiators and like the persecution of people or criminals. Christians also were brought in there, and they would kill them. And when their blood hit the white sand, everybody would go, more, kill more. There's a bloodlust. And he said to the Romans, every time a drop of our blood lands in that sand in your arenas, 10 more Christians are going to grow up from the seed that you just planted. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. When you kill us, our blood, it brings new Christians about. It seems paradoxical. It seems crazy, because if I came there to your group there and I said, okay, I'm going to start a new club here in Plattsville, we're going to say this club, but I guarantee that within 5 years, you'll all be killed for being a member of this club. Nobody's going to join that stupid club. But the Christians said, we will join. And the more that died, the more joined, because the Romans had nothing to live for ultimately. They didn't have any a strong morality and view of the infinite. The Christians had something the Romans didn't have, and they really believed it and lived it. And the Romans said, we want what you have. Augustine wrote, he said, the earth has been filled with the blood of the martyrs as with seed. And from that seed have grown up the crops of the church. The martyrs have asserted Christ's cause more effectively when dead than when they were alive. They speak about him today. They preach him today, but their tongues are silent, but their deeds echo around the world. They were arrested, bound, imprisoned, brought to trial, tortured, burned at the stake, stoned to death, run through, fed to the wild beasts, and all of their kinds of death. They were jeered as worthless. But precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints, and they became the seed of the church. There's a great story of Justin Martyr, who was a philosopher. He wore the philosopher's pallium through Rome. When you were a philosopher, you had the right to wear a special pallium, a special robe. And he studied all of the philosophies. And he said that he became a Christian. One of the reasons was because he saw Christians die. He said, how can they die like that? We Romans say that they are criminals. They're cannibals because they eat the body and the blood of one of their leaders. They're incestuous because they have these secret meetings where they love and kiss each other. They're atheists because they don't have any God up in front like Zeus or Aphrodite that they bow down and worship. These are criminals, and they killed them. But he said when they die, they pray for each other. They sing hymns to their God. He said when we Romans die, we die poorly. We curse and we scream. But look at the Christians. How can they die with such nobility? It's because Christians knew what they were dying for, and they knew where they were going after they were dying. In fact, Ignatius of Antioch, one of my favorites, he almost single-handedly made me a Catholic when I read his early writings. He said, the lions are my way to God. And this was the view of the early Christians. Now, I'm going to give you just a quick example. I'm running out of time here. The time sure goes fast. I'm going to give you a quick example of what it might have been like for you to have lived during those first 300 years of the Roman Empire, where you were part of the despised subculture. It's easier for me to do this when I'm in the room with you than when I'm over here in Michigan speaking to my laptop, but I'll do the best I can. Imagine that you're sitting there and all of a sudden, I'm going to be a little theatrical here. I've still got a lot of little boy left in me, so bear with me here a bit. And I am going to, I am now Lucius, the Roman emperor, or the general, and I have my double two-edged sword. This is a real sword, by the way. This isn't a plaything, kind of like the ones that the Knights of Columbus use. I always kind of laugh at them with those. I'm glad they carry them around, but this is a real sword. This could take a head off with one swipe without a problem. And I bought this helmet for the movies that I made. Now imagine that I'm Lucius, the centurion, and I step into your room right now, and all of a sudden these soldiers follow me in and they surround your room and they all draw their swords like I have. And I say to you, we are going to get something straight here today, because we heard that you're going to meet here tonight. And we heard that all of you are Christians. Is that true? Are you a Christian? We are here because we've had a problem in our province lately. There's been no rain, and the enemy has broken down the walls and ravaged our cities. And we didn't know why Zeus was doing this to us. Why was Zeus, our patron god, the God, father of all the gods, why was he allowing this to happen to us? And then we found out why. It's because of people like you who call yourselves Christians, and you no longer worship Zeus. You dissed him. You made him angry. How many of you showed up for the Zeus festival this year? That's what I thought. You all avoided it. You stayed away from the Zeus festival because you don't believe in Zeus. And I'm here to fix that right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set up over here in front an altar to Zeus. And on that altar, you're going to come and pinch a bit of incense. That's all it will take. Now, this is exactly when you look at artwork from the early centuries, these Romans were trying to entice the Christians with a pinch of incense in front of the gods like this. This is the way it happened. So we're going to have you all come up and you're going to pinch incense and you're going to burn it to Zeus. And when you do that, in all of my magnanimity, what I'm going to do is give you a libellum. Oh, that course, you don't know Latin. A libellum is a certificate of being a citizen in good standing. I'll have my secretary here. They're going to fill it out for you. And as soon as you pinch incense to Zeus, you are going to get your statement that you were a Roman in good standing. And just think of my magnanimity. You're going to go home and your house will still be there tonight. And your family will still be there tonight. And your parents will still have their job on Monday morning. But if you don't come up and burn incense to the Roman gods, well then, so no, what? All of you are very sensible people. So I'm going to have everybody come on up right now. And I want you to come up and burn incense to Zeus and we'll get this thing all taken care of. Now, maybe one or two of you get up and then Mary Claire says, whoa, 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 whoa. Are you sure you want to do that? Remember what our Lord said. If you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. And what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And you go back and sit down. And then I, Lucius, am no longer so magnanimous. And now I say, okay, I met a group like you last week in Ephesus. I know how to take care of you. And I turn around and I say, Brutus, get in here. And in walks a 250-pound executioner with tattoos all over his arm and a ring in his nose. And he's got the chopping block under his arm covered with dried blood from weeks earlier. And he comes out in front of all of you and he pulls the sword and he goes, hurrah! And I say now, for those of you who will not come and burn incense to Zeus, you will come and get in line and meet my friend Brutus. All of you will make a decision within the next 5 minutes, which line you're going to get into. And those are the only two options. Let's move and out of your seats now. Come up and make your choice. And I always like to ask yourself a question. If that really happened tonight in that room with you, which line would you get into tonight? I won't ask for anybody to raise their hand, but what line would you get into tonight? One time, I have to tell you, when I gave this talk, a young college student came running through the crowd up the center aisle of this big auditorium. And that's a scary thing when you're a speaker giving a talk and some big guy comes running up the aisle. You have no idea what he's going to do. He's going to maybe take me down. I don't know what he's going to do. But he laid on that stage and he put his head down and he yelled at the top of his voice, kill me now, because I'm not going to deny Jesus Christ. I am a Christian. And there wasn't a dry eye in the whole room. I had to stop for a few minutes to get my own composure because I had tears running because it made it so real. And he meant it. He would have died for Jesus right there on the spot because he said, I am a Christian. That was really very moving. But this is what the early Christians suffered. This is what they experienced. And because they did that, you and I are here today. They converted the Roman Empire because they really, really, really believed it. And by really believing it, they impacted the whole world. Now, there's a story that I have. I'm watching the clock here. I think I got about 10 minutes left. And I am going to tell this story. It's actually a true story in the 4th century, right before Christianity became legalized. And it's told by St. Basil, doctor of the church. And it's also their altar to these 40 brave men, soldiers. There's an altar to them in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And it's happened that they're called the 12th Legion, and they were nicknamed armed with lightning because they were one of the most powerful striking forces that Rome had. And they were the best and bravest of the Roman Empire. And when the great Roman Empire was sent to fight in Armenia, no soldiers were braver or more loyal than these, but it reached the ears of Emperor Licinius that many of the Roman soldiers had accepted the Christian faith. So a decree was dispatched. If there be any among your soldiers who cling to the faith of the Christians, they must die. The prefect called the soldiers together and asked, not knowing, are any of you among you Christians? And 40 stepped forward and stood at attention, and they were not expected. They were the best and most select of his soldiers. He demanded them to deny Christ and offer sacrifices to the pagan gods. They refused. Not a single man would deny the Lord. Finally, the prefect said, "The decrees of the emperor must be obeyed. I order you all to strip off your uniforms and your clothes, throw your swords into the snow, and march out onto the lake of ice." In the meantime, they built fires along the shore with tubs of warm water to entice the men to recant and come back. The 40 soldiers were stripped naked and marched out onto the ice in the center of the lake in the wintertime. They broke into a chant. 40 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown. In the night, they were overcome by cold. One soldier caved in and crept back to the warm fire and renounced the Lord. And they put him into one of the warm baths, but he died instantly because of the shock of the cold and the heat. And then from the ice came a chant again. 39 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown. One of the guards was so overcome with the courage of these Christians and their fortitude and their resolve. And he said he saw a huge light over the lake, over these men, that he stripped off his uniform. He threw his sword into the snow, and he walked out and joined the Christians on the ice. And the chant came up again. 40 Christians, 40 soldiers for thee, O Christ, to win the crown. In the morning, they were all frozen to death, and they burned their bodies on the ice and scattered their ashes. They were all dead. Now you could say, what a waste of a life. 40 men. They probably had families back home waiting for them. Maybe some had children. Maybe they had businesses. What a waste of life. What a waste of people. What fools they were to do that. They could have just kept their Christianity private and gone about their life and not have to be affected. But do you think if we called those 40 men in front of all of you today and you asked them a question, was it a waste of time? Was it stupid for us to do? I would claim that all 40 of them would say, no, it was our way to God, and we don't regret what we did for 1 second. These were the kind of people that changed the Roman Empire and brought Christianity into the forefront so that we could live our lives that way. I have only about 5 minutes left, so I want to tell two quick stories. My son, Jesse, he has 8 kids. They're a wonderful family, homeschooled. And when they were younger, though, wasn't recently, but when they were younger, there was only about 4 of them at the time. And we had a pool in our backyard. It was a round pool, and it was above ground, just a cheap pool. And one day he said to his kids, hey, kids, you know what? If we get in the pool and we all start going around in a circle together, we can create a big whirlpool with a vortex in the middle, and the water will go down in the middle and it'll splash over the sides. And the kids all said, yeah, right, Dad. We don't believe that for a minute. He says, let's try. So they got in the pool and they started going around, and it was hard because the water doesn't want to move. It likes to stand still. Well, anyway, after a while, they got it going, and the kids were so amazed that this big whirlpool is going around and around. So my son says, okay, let's pretend that this whirlpool is the world. It's the world trying to force us to go with it. It's trying to force us to live the way they do, to accept their morals or immorality, to accept their anti-God, anti-life position. The whole world is trying to pull us along. And he said, but what if we turn around and go the other way and say, we're going to swim against the stream. We're going to swim upstream, where I get the title for the talk. And they turned around. He said, let's go the other way. And they found it was so hard. The water was rushing the other way. The world was pushing them and going in it. And they decided to go upstream. They turned around and they started going, and they're pulling on the side of the pool. It was so hard. They were puffing and puffing. And little Sammy says, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. I'm tired. And Maria Faustina said, swim, Sammy. Swim. You don't want to go to hell, Sammy. Don't quit. Swim. And they went around and around. And pretty soon they got the whirlpool going the other way. And my son said, see, once if you get caught in the whirlpool of the world and it's trying to force you to think the way they think and act the way they act, and we know it's wrong and we should live as Christians, what we were going to turn around, and we were able to change the stream going back the other way. And I contend that if there's enough of us Christians that stop being afraid, stop being cowards about it, and start swimming against the culture, we can also, over time, turn the culture back around, following the example of exactly what the early Christians did. Two last stories. I think that we need, especially young people, your age, but even younger, because these younger people are being influenced so much by television and the iPhones and everything else. Parents have very little influence on their kids anymore compared to the public schools and the media and the press and all the gadgets we have. So this young man, we helped their family become Catholic. They were very anti-Catholic. And when they became Catholic, this young man, they asked me if I would be his sponsor for confirmation. And I said no, because I travel too much. I travel sometimes 200,000 miles a year, my wife and I. We're both 2 million milers just with Delta. And I said to him, but I will meet with him one evening to talk to him about confirmation and what it means to be a Christian. And they said, oh, thank you so much. But they have no idea what they asked, because they know that I don't do things the way other people do things. I like to be a little different. So what I did is, you saw that Roman helmet and that sword. When I knew he was coming over that Wednesday night, I got that Roman helmet. I won't put it on again. You already saw it once, but I put that Roman helmet on, and I had my wife pinned a red sheet over my shoulder. So I looked like a Roman centurion, and I put the sword in the scabbard, and I hid in the shadows of my front porch, and I waited for that kid to come. They pulled up the driveway. He got out of the car, and he starts walking up the steps to our front porch. And I could see it in his eyes. Oh, I have to go listen to this bald guy talk about Jesus. Well, he was in for a surprise, because as soon as he got to the top of the steps, I jumped out and I took that sword and I pulled it out of its sheath, and I said, Matthew, and I pushed him against the house with the sword. I didn't hurt him or anything, but I pushed him with it, and I pushed him up against the bricks, and I says, Matthew, are you ready to die for Jesus Christ right now? Because I'm a busy man and I don't have time for you. If you're not ready to die for Jesus Christ, you're certainly not ready to be confirmed and to be a Christian. I said, I'm a busy man. Are you ready to die for Jesus right now? And the kid, he didn't know what to do. He just started going, I will, I can. And you should have seen his parents' eyes in the car. They're going, oh, what did we get this kid into? But I brought him into the house, and for 3 hours, we talked about what it meant to be a Christian and a martyr, and why you are even be willing to give up your life for Jesus and to live for him publicly. And his parents said that everywhere he went for the next 6 months, he told everybody about the sword. So the message kind of spread. One last story. When I was thinking through these things, I said, Lord, what if I don't talk? What if I just remain silent? And I remember having this kind of a image in my mind. I'm not going to say God gave it to me. That's presumptuous. But this story came to my mind. I viewed myself on the last day of judgment. And I'm standing in the waiting room, and I hear in the throne room, Steve Ray. And I come out of the waiting room, and there's God on the throne in front of me. And he said, Steve Ray, we'll see if your name is in the book of life. And he goes through the book of life. And if you think this isn't going to happen, read Revelation chapter 20, 21, and 22. At the end of time, there's going to be a book opened, and you're going to stand before God, and it's going to be looked at this book to see if your name is in that book. So he looks through the book, and he says, okay, Steve Ray, yes, here you are. Come into the joy of the Lord. And at that moment, the beautiful angels, they grab me and they start taking me off to this door to go up into heaven. And it's beautiful music coming out of there, beautiful smells, everything's nice. But then I hear James Smith. And I say, wait a minute, that's my friend. He's the guy that I sat next to at school. He's the guy that we did sports together. He's my friend. I want to see what happens to him when he stands before God. And so James Smith stands before God, and God says, James Smith. And he says, let's see the book of life. And he starts going through the pages and goes through them again and again and again. And then he said, James, I'm sorry, but your name is not in the book of life. And he closes the book, and these evil creatures come from the other side to another door, and they start to drag my friend James away to go into this other door. And James sees me going in that door, and he breaks away from it. And he says, wait a minute, Steve Ray, why are you going in that door? And I'm going in this door. And I said, well, James, it's because I was a Christian. I was baptized and I followed Jesus Christ. I was an intentional disciple. And I know I kind of kept it to myself, but I was a Christian. And I went to church, and when I sinned, I went to confession and all these things. And James says, wait a minute. You used to sit next to me in school. You used to play sports with me. We went out and drank once in a while together. You and I were good buddies for years. And you never told me about this. You knew about it and you never told me. And I said, well, James, I was trying to be ecumenically sensitive. I was trying to be politically correct. You have your own ideas. I didn't want to shove my morality down your throat. And James says, are you kidding me? And the last words I'll ever hear from my friend James are, damn you, Steve Ray. And I pledged, me and my family have pledged that I'm never going to have anybody say, damn you, Steve Ray, at the end of time, that I'm going to do everything I can to be an intentional disciple of Christ, to make it obvious. That's why I wear this cross everywhere. I get comments everywhere I go on this. It's a beautiful San Damiano. And I don't wear jewelry. I'm not a jewelry guy. I wear that for one reason, and that's to start conversations. And boy, does it ever start conversations. But I made up my mind, when I'm out, I'm going to talk to at least 2 or 3 people about the Lord every day, even if it's just to say, God bless you. And somebody says to me, happy holidays. I said, well, ma'am, right back at you. Merry Christmas, because it's all about Christ. And boy, does that ever start conversations. I'm not shy anymore. I'm getting old. I want to be ready to meet the Lord, and I want to take as many people with me as I can. And I'm going to do everything I can to change the culture. I can't do it alone. So I'm here to invite all of you guys to join us. And that's the end.
Thank you, Steve, for your talk. I would love to now open the floor for questions for Steve, an open floor Q&A. Any questions you all might have regarding this talk, anything he touched on or whatever it might be. If someone has a question, if you would just kindly raise your hand and then just come up to the microphone, which we will move, and you can ask your question directly.
Now I'm on the spot. Don't all come rushing up at once.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
You mentioned just a lot about being a martyr, and I just asked like a personal question of like, when did you have that kind of switch in your own faith journey where you would, be willing to be martyred for the faith?
When I was about your age, I remember questioning. I was raised a Baptist, and I was never allowed to question the faith. It was always, don't ever doubt, you'll go to hell. The devil's that makes you doubt, you always have to believe. But I got to the point in my 20s where I had to challenge it, and I had to look at all the other alternatives, because I'm a skeptic at heart. The reason I'm a Catholic is because I'm a skeptic at heart. People say, well, then you shouldn't be. No, it's because I'm a skeptic. I have to have things proved to me. I have to know for certain that I'm doing the right thing. So I studied and worked on all of this. And because I'm a skeptic, I eventually became a Catholic. And when I started becoming Catholic, it was really the writings of the early Christians that changed my mind. They were very distinctly Catholic. There was no Baptist back then. And when I read their stories of what they were willing to do for Jesus, I had to ask myself, am I really a disciple of Jesus like they were? Or am I just a Sunday morning happy clappy Jesus, but not anything where I have to pay for it? And then I had to really begin to ask myself that question of, what is God going to require of me? And I remember thinking, but I don't like pain. I really, really don't like pain. Even if I get sick and get nauseated, I just feel like I want to die. I don't like pain. I can't imagine ever going through martyrdom like some of these people did. But I also know that God says that there will never be anything that hits you that I don't give you the grace to survive it. And so I really remember there were stages in my life where I was willing to do it. When I was young, when I discovered Jesus at first, I said, Jesus, I'm going to be yours and yours alone, no matter what happens. even if I have to die for you. But it became more of a resolve when I got older and I really realized what I was saying. And back then, when I was young, you didn't really have a chance. You didn't think it would really ever happen. But the way the world's going today, it's much more likely that my kids and my 19 grandkids will be in a world where they are persecuted and martyred for Jesus, which is why I tell my kids in front of my grandkids, I want you to raise my grandchildren to be martyrs. And little Maria Faustina says, but why do you want us all to die? I said, Maria, I don't want you to die, but I want you to know there's something worth dying for. And I impress it upon my kids too, that you don't want to die, but you have to be a follower of Jesus and his church. And if you have to die to maintain that, don't ever turn and walk away. So I guess it was a matter of resolve over years. And the older I get, the more committed I am to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. Thank you again for speaking tonight. And I just got a quick question about just obviously you have some experience speaking to people about Christ. What are some practicals that you have that you kind of learned from over the years of ways that you can, easily bring it up or have a good conversation, whether or not it be with someone that you kind of know a little bit, how to kind of get into a deeper conversation, or someone that you've known for a long time, but they're resistant?
Good question. Let's divide people into two categories. Those who are family and friends, they're the toughest. I remember when I became Catholic, I wanted to talk to my mom and dad about being Catholic. And my mom says, listen here, young man, I used to wipe your butt and wipe your nose when you snotty little nose. And now you're telling me that I'm wrong and you know more than I do. Family and friends are the most difficult. And I did write an article for Catholic Answers magazine. It's called 6 Rules for Dealing with Non-Catholic Family and Friends. It's on my website too, CatholicConvert.com. But every single person is different, and you can never, God always respects our free will. He doesn't force himself on us. He is very polite in that sense. He woos us like a lover. He entices us and is an artist, but he never forces himself on us. So I find that some people are going to be receptive to talk about it and some are not. So I told you earlier, I wear this cross everywhere I go. And I got on a plane a while ago because I fly a lot. And in the lobby, in the waiting area, a young man came up to me. He's about 30 years old. And he says, oh, that's beautiful. I said, thank you very much. I wear it proudly as a Catholic. That was my answer. I could have just said thank you and walked away. But I said, thank you. I like people to know exactly what I believe and know to be the truth. He said, so you believe it? You really believe it? I said, of course I do. I believe it enough to die for it. And he was, and he walked away. He ended up sitting next to me on the plane. And 10 minutes into the flight, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you really believe that, don't you? And I said, oh, yes, I do. He says, I'm an atheist. I have absolutely nothing to believe in or to look forward to. And I would love to believe what you do. Can you tell me why I should be a Christian? And I had the guy for 2 hours on the plane. Now, I didn't have to say anything. I could have just said, thank you. It's a nice cross. Thank you. But I put the hook out there. I put the bait out to see if he'd take it. That's what I do a lot of times. My wife, at the grocery store, there was an elderly lady with her arms full of groceries. And my wife said, oh, here, I'll help you. I'll open the door. And the older lady said, oh, thank you very much. I sure appreciate it. My wife said, oh, you're very welcome. We're Catholics and we love to help people. Now, she could have just opened the door and left it at that. Us Catholics love to do nice things for people, but we don't usually tell them why we're doing it. So we've made up our mind. When somebody says to me, happy holidays, I say, well, it is, but I would rather say Merry Christmas. And 99 out of 100 times they go, oh, thank you. Our boss told us we couldn't say that, but Merry Christmas to you too. So there's every day in conversations, there's a way. Now, my wife says, when you wake up in the morning, you should put your antennas up, zip, 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 like this, And what she said by meaning that is that God, if you put yourself in God's hands, and you say, I would like to start talking to people about you and about the church and morality. Would you please start bringing people to me? And I'm going to make my commitment to find at least one person a day to talk to. And so then when you realize it's like a chessboard where you're on the chessboard and God is moving the pieces, eventually trying to get that guy into your presence because he knows you're going to talk to him. So God wants somebody to talk to this man about the Lord. And so he brings them to you. He maybe spends 2 months getting them to you, and then you don't say anything. And then God goes, oh, no, I got to start all over again. So I did this talk at a conference once, and a lady wrote to me. She said, Steve, I've never had more fun in my life. I used to think the Catholic life was boring. She said, I've never had more fun in my life because I put my antennas up every morning now. And I say to the Lord, I want to talk to 2 people about you. So let me know who they are. She said, every day now I go to work and I go shopping and I'm just looking. Who is it, Lord? Is it that guy? And then I'll say, God bless you, and see if a conversation gets started. And she said, I've never had more fun in my life. And I've talked to 2 people every single day that God brought to me. So there's ways you could do it politely. Wearing a cross. I had one guy say, well, I've always worn a cross, but I wore it inside. After 10, I'm going to wear it outside. And there's times when you get on an airplane, you see what the guy's reading and you can make a comment or ask a question. And all the time, I'm always leading my discussions. I can always bring them back to Jesus somehow. And it's fun.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Steven. I only heard your last story, but I'm kind of concerned. I have a situation where I believe in Catholicism, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this persecution time period that we're entering, we read about Father Zizek in Russia and some other folks in that part of the world, and a lot of Holocaust stories, because cognitively we want to kind of understand what we're facing and how to be, according to all those who've already gone through it. And my personal thing is, I'm concerned. I'm estranged from my sister, and I'm afraid the offense of speaking things of God. Strong atheist, strong pagan like person. And I don't know, I'm afraid that if I bring forth Catholicism and the truth to her, she'll use it against her own soul. Is that
I understand?
I'm afraid that I will actually do something. I don't know where the responsibility is. I'm afraid if I do something, if I don't do anything, I'm in trouble with God. If I do something, I'm in trouble with God because of what that person might do with what I just gave them. Particularly if the church goes into apostasy in a very severe way, I believe that they would just go on that wave and they would be doing, kumbaya, happy times. And I don't know how I would look in front of God if I just brought a person so dear to me to end up in that moment.
I understand exactly what you mean. And I'll give you one experience of mine. My mom and dad were very strong Baptists. And I discovered that Catholicism is the fullness of the faith. Now, my dad died, and I know he went to heaven because my dad, nothing in the world he loved more than Jesus. But I also learned that I wanted to tell my dad about the fullness of the faith and the beauty of the Eucharist and confession for your sins, and that God has made a way for these things to be done, and he has not appropriated those things. But I also knew that if I talked to my dad too much about the Catholic Church and he rejected it, then he would have that culpability on his soul for having rejected the church. It's one thing to find Jesus and love him. It's another thing to find the church and reject it. So I always said to my wife, I'm hesitant to talk to dad too much about it because I don't want dad to reject it and become culpable for the rejection of the truth. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think all we have to do is to be sensitive to people. And if we are living a good example, a lot of times people just can see by our example, the joy that we have and the hope that we have. That's what Paul says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you, and be sensitive to God. And I agree with you that there are periods of our life, maybe maybe you don't talk about it now, but there comes a disaster. There's a car accident in somebody's life. And all of a sudden you can say, can I pray for you? Or I'm so sorry that you're in this experience. I've had the same thing and here's how I dealt with it. And so I think that we need to pray and ask God to lead us to do that. And I know there are some people that we're dealing with right now that I know I can't talk to about it, especially an older brother of mine who resents me for being a Christian. And he is very vocal about it. So I don't bring it up with him. He knows exactly where I stand. He knows what I believe, and I love him. And I try to be a good example to him, and I'm generous of spirit with him, but I don't push it on him. Everybody's, like I said to the question before, God respects our free will, and we have to respect people's free will too.
Yeah. Just one last thing. In 2019, we had a family reunion by spontaneity. It just happened. And I was very concerned. I wanted to, because I came back to the Catholic faith because I left when I was 17 and left for a long time. And we had this family reunion and I didn't know what to say because it seemed like in many situations, love is what has to prevail.
Yes.
So what happened was I was doing what you were sharing with us today about those two people on a daily basis. And I was just kind of consciously and unconsciously waiting for the moment. And it was our family was there. And I just didn't know what would happen. I was resigned, but I was open.
Yeah. I think that's the best position to be in, and to ask the Lord to lead you, or maybe somebody will bring up a question and they'll open the door for you to discuss it with them. But I think you are in the right place. And I said earlier that family is the toughest of all. It's one thing to go out and talk to a stranger. It's another thing to talk to a relative who knows you and has lived with you and said, well, yeah, I know what you were like before. Are you kidding me? You got religion now? I know how you used to live. It's very difficult with family. That's why I wrote this article called 6 Rules for Dealing with Them.
Thanks.
So the first one is don't argue with them. Don't burn bridges. It doesn't mean don't discuss, but don't argue to burn bridges. Number 2, love them more than you ever loved them before and make sure they know it. Number 3 is to pray and make sacrifices for them. And not just to say you're going to do, but really do it. In fact, take a piece of paper and put 2 lines down the center of the paper. And on one, say, here's my request, Lord. Here's the date I requested it. And over here, I'm going to put the date when you answer it. I'm holding you accountable over here. You answered, I'm going to put it down here. And then I'll say, okay, good. You kept your promise to me. The 4th one is to show the joy of the Lord in your life, because nobody wants to be around a grumpy, grouchy Catholic. But if you have joy, they say, what does he have that I don't have? The other one is to have patience, and everything's not going to happen today. We always want it to happen today. Maybe not this family reunion. Maybe it'll happen the next family reunion. The other one is do your homework so that when they do ask questions, you're ready to give them a good answer. But the last one, I like this one the best, is ask God to bring somebody else into their life to influence them, because they're never going to listen to you. And that happened to me with my in-laws. They wouldn't talk to us after we became Catholic. I prayed every day for that. And some other family came in that they loved and respected and talked to them about the Catholic faith. And all of a sudden we were friends again. So I think ask God to bring somebody else into your family's life that maybe they would be able to listen to easier than you.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you and welcome home, by the way.
Thank you very much. It's just, I can't believe how our God just loves us so much. And like you said, he's a gentleman.
Yes, he is. He's a great lover too.
All of us rebels.
Yeah. He's a great lover too. He woos us. He loves us into the church. I've also heard him explained as the Hound Dog of Heaven. He never lets up on your trail. He's always after you.
Yes, I just asked a student here this past Sunday to print that poem for us.
Wow, good.
Hound of Heaven.
Yeah, very good.
I'm going to send it to my niece. It's her birthday on the feast of St. Faustina.
Very nice.
The 5th. Yeah. Thank you.
God bless you.
For those of us who are privileged enough to know and understand the gospel and to have experienced the love of Christ, what are some of the temptations that you would warn against for when we try to evangelize that could either damage our relationship with Christ or inhibit us from proclaiming the gospel as effectively as possible?
It's built into us to want to win. It's just part of our nature, especially guys, I think at times. We want to win, competitive. And I have done this myself. Argued with a person to the point of burning bridges with them, so I couldn't talk to them anymore. Sometimes we can win a battle and lose the war. So what I'm thinking of is anytime we are in a conversation for the sake of the other person, never violate their sensibilities and push them to beyond the point where they're willing to discuss. Don't try to win the battle. Don't try to win the argument. Sometimes it's better just to listen. That's why I think also for our sake, God gave us one mouth for talking, but he gave us 2 ears. So we should listen twice as much as we talk. And a person that we're talking to or want to talk to about the Lord is never going to listen to us if we haven't first shown them that we love them and care about them, which means that maybe the first time or two, we listen to them and we empathize. And it's good for us because we're mortifying the flesh in a way where we want to win. We want to push this person. We want to get another conquest. But to say, I'm going to listen and love this person, and I'm going to let them talk and share their story. I'll give you an example of this. When we first became Catholic, a friend of mine named Al Cresta and our family said, every Sunday, we're going to open up our homes for people who want to talk about the Catholic faith, mainly people who object to it. For 2 years, every Sunday afternoon, we had people that came for many different reasons. And not always, I don't even know how all of them found out about us. Some of them hated the Catholic Church and they just wanted to yell at us and tell us how we listened to them. We let them yell and we were kind back and we would talk and answer their questions. And over a 2-year period, we watched 200 people become Catholics and join the church because we listened to them. We were willing to not be proud, not try to win an argument. And it was good for our soul as well. So I would say to be a lovable, listening person more than a talking person. Uh-oh, it looks like I lost you here somehow. There, you're back.
Thank you.
That wasn't me, was it? Okay, I lost the screen for a minute.
No, that was on our end.
Okay, good.
Hey.
Hello.
You talk about evangelizing a lot and like being a public and intentional Christian. And how do you do that for like a normal person who's kind of a chronic coward, as probably a lot of people are, or more than who are willing to admit it?
Well, I'm talking very boisterous with you because I'm a closet coward too. It's not easy to do that kind of a thing. And it has to be just like we're intentional disciples of Jesus Christ. Every day I try. There's a book called Practicing the Presence of God, realizing all day long that I'm in his presence. And I'm in the world, which needs to be influenced by him. So I go about my life. I go about doing everything I need to do. And I try to do it with excellence because God wants me to do things excellently. But I try to, in many ways, get other people involved, like helping someone with the door. Today, I said, God bless you to a couple of people. And nobody does that anymore. When I was a boy, everybody said, God bless you. Nobody does that. They're afraid they're going to offend someone. But in reality, 90% of the people love having you say, God bless you, or I'll pray for you. People just are moved by that. And they've all been cowed, terrorized by the secular world that says, shut up, don't talk about God. It's stupid. Only idiots talk about God. We are for everything else. Any view you want is fine. Don't you? But people really, the majority of people are good-hearted people and they love to talk about these things. They love to have you say, God bless you, or Merry Christmas, Christmas, and just go about your everyday life. Be a good example, be joyful. And whenever you get a chance to talk to somebody, sometimes it might, I'll tell you what, when we go out to eat at a restaurant or something, I have these little prayer cards or a little gospel card, and I leave a tip and I leave one of those cards, a little tract with it about Jesus and the church. You can't leave a cheap tip though. I mean, don't leave $1, but if you're going to do that, make sure it's a fair tip. And I also, when I pay my bills, you put your invoice in the envelope with a check. I always put in something else about Jesus. I put in a prayer card. I put in something about the rosary. And so every day things like that are going out. When you come to my front door, I have the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary next to my door. So anybody that comes to my door immediately knows I'm a Catholic. I really confuse the Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't know what to do, because I also have a Jewish menorah, and they say, a Jewish menorah, well, what is this guy, But I like to do that. I like on my house to have a picture of Jesus on the porch. When I used to have my own business, when you came in my lobby, there was a big crucifix in the entrance. And I had a guy come in one time for an employment. He says, I don't like that on the wall. I said, then you don't have to work here. But many people loved it. They loved it and said, I love coming to work at a place that has the crucifix and that has Christian principles and values. So I'd say go about your daily life, do what you do, but always be ready with a word of encouragement, something to help someone and tell them why. And over time, you can affect a lot of people.
That's cool, because we always forget that being a good Catholic means being a good person, and people really like good people and want to be good people.
Exactly.
Like, I don't know, because there's a lot of a problem with nowadays. It seems like if you are Christian, and especially Catholic, but like Christians, I read the internet too much, have the reputation of being nasty, judgmental,
Yes.
single-minded.
Yes.
Sure.
And don't do this and don't do that. You can't do this and you can't do that. It's all about the negative. No,
Haters.
Christianity is all about joyful, loving people, being kind to people, being a good example to people. There are times where Jesus said, you whitewashed sepulchres full of dead men's bones. There's time where Jesus did that too. But I think most of the time he was showing compassion, healing them, making bread for them to eat. And I think if we did more of that, and more kindness. On the internet, just so you'll know, I have a lot of people, they know I'm an apologist, which means that I defend the faith. So they will write really nasty things, like to pick a fight with me. And I'll write back and I'll say, I really appreciate the love that you displayed in your email, that you really have a concern for my soul. And I'm convinced that I'm wrong and in error, and you loved me enough to write to me. And I really appreciate that. Maybe we can continue the conversation. Steve Ray. How are they going to respond to that? They were nasty to me, but I was kind back. And then, 2 out of 3 times, it ends up in a very nice conversation. And I've had a couple of people become Catholics who at the first you would have thought would cut my throat if they were near me.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. This time went very fast, by the way. I've enjoyed it very much. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Steve, we just wanted to say thank you one more time for your talk. That about wraps us up for the evening. Thanks so much to you all for coming out, and thank you again.
Well, I just would like to close by saying thank you all for coming. There's so many other things young people could be doing tonight, and they're coming out to learn more about Jesus and how they can live the faith. And on your deathbed, you are all long way from your deathbed, but I was with a woman tonight who's going to die any day. My mom, who's 100. And I'll tell you that on your deathbed, you're not going to say, oh, I wish I'd have played more golf or made an extra $1 million or went and watched more movies. You're going to say, I wish I'd have spent more time getting to know Jesus. I wish I'd have spent more time with my family and being kind to people. So kind of every day, remember what it's going to be like on your deathbed and what's going to be important to you at that moment, and live your life that way. And it's been great to be with all of you. I love speaking to young people because you have your whole life ahead of you. You can change the world. I'm an old guy. I'm not going to be around a whole lot longer. You guys have your whole life ahead of you. You'll be influencing this world for Jesus and the church long after I'm gone. So God bless you.
Thanks so much.
Well, Saint Augustine, you did a good job.
Thank you. Thank
so
you.
I guess I'm going to sign out now, but thanks for helping us out.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming again.
All right. God bless you. Bye-bye.
You too, Steve. Take care.